mashallah, man. Good to see you.
Good to see
Okay,
you as well.
let's start now. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah, wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. Jazakallah khair, everyone, for joining us again. Sorry for the delay. But inshallah, we'll still try to finish right on time. So I know this is a topic that some people saw the flyer and it probably triggered them a little bit, right? It's like, oh, Islam versus, Desi Arab culture. What does that even mean? Now, I want to start off by saying this is not a like a SJP versus MSA type of talk, right? We wanted
Not, oh man.
yeah, sorry, but we wanted to do something a lot more deeper than that, inshallah, and something that hopefully um everyone can walk away with some type of benefit, some type of value, inshallah. We're not just going to talk about culture and Islam. We wanted to talk a little bit about the future of Islam, right? And basically the future of Islam in this country, because uh, culture and Islam is directly related to that, right? I personally myself have met people who left Islam because of the way that they were treated by the elders in the masjid. I personally have met people who were born and raised in Muslim countries and they became Murtad, they left Islam altogether, right? Because of honestly such petty reasons and issues, right? And a lot of it has to do with the culture. So with that, we have our esteemed guest, Sheikh Mohammed Badawi. Sheikh Mohammed Badawi, he has graduated from Qura with a degree in Sharia. We actually had him once for that when we had events on Palestine. And alhamdulillah, it's great to have you back, Muhammad. So Muhammad is actually like a friend of mine. That's why it's he's Sheikh Muhammad, but I call him Muhammad because we
That
just go
was
back
fine.
like that. Yeah.
It just says Muhammad on my birth certificate.
So Muhammad, I want to ask you, right? You work with youth on a daily basis. Like it's literally in your job description, right? How do you envision Islam in the next 50 years in America?
Bismillah, alhamdulillah, salatu wassalamu ala rasulullah. Begin in the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and ask Him to send His endless, most abundant, most choicest peace and blessings and mercy and increase upon our dear beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his wives and his family members and his companions and all those who tread their path till the day of judgment. Praying that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bestows His blessing and mercy and compassion upon all of us here and our families and includes us in their legacy. Allahumma ameen. Jazakallah khair for having me, Naveed. It's always a pleasure to join you. And subhanAllah, such a interesting topic, very, very loaded. It could go so many ways. I'm sure there's so many people coming in here. Not sure if it's gonna, and even me myself, I was considering, should I go culture bashing? Should we, go on trauma dumping? People just share what they went through, or could we analyze it analytically and theoretically? There's so many different ways you go at it, and I think that the Muslim Ummah needs all of it. It needs all of it. In certain situations and with certain caveats, of course. But there's a level where we could bash our own cultures. There's a level where we need to break them down historically and see where things came from and their actual meanings. There's a level where we need to have conversations like this. There's a lot of work to be done. And alhamdulillah, I'm glad that we're starting to do it in a decent capacity, inshallah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us tawfiq. And before I get to the Islam in 50 years, inshallah, I want to just add one caveat. As much as I love the title because it'll grab people in, I would put an asterisk there. Islam versus Arab/Desi culture or any other ethnicity you want to put in there, really, but with an asterisk. And the asterisk actually wouldn't be at the end of the sentence. It would be at the word versus. Because Islam is not really an enemy of culture. Islam didn't come to erase culture. It didn't come to obliterate cultural practices. It didn't come to make us a monolith that we dress similar and eat similar and have similar weddings. Not at all. It came with guidelines for a lot of these categories, specific commands and prohibitions for a lot of these categories, but also with a lot of room in a lot of these categories. When it comes to business transactions, when it comes to the fiqh of marriage and divorce, when it comes to the fiqh of child rearing, when it comes to marital roles to a big extent. When you study fiqh, you find, or Sharia, you find that there's so many different rulings where the scholars will say, and this goes back to the urf. This goes back to the culture of the people involved. We will not issue an Islamic ruling. There could be an Islamic preference, but at the same time, it gave room for people to do what they want in their custom. One very common example is like dowry. The variations of dowry, with all the injunctions that happen and the problems that result, it was left open, and cultural practices, even in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, were different amongst tribes and amongst groups of people. So, and that is to be accommodated, and that's to be upheld sometimes by Islamic law. Sometimes, like a case can come to Islamic law, and in that court, the judge will say the government will uphold the cultural norms of this family. Like everyone has to abide by them because it's has its place in our lives. So that's a very important preamble, I think, for us to understand that culture is not an enemy. Culture needs to be refined, needs to be tailored, and the only ultimate truth, the only timeless, always applicable, always correct, always best interest is Islam. That's once we make that conclusion, once we have that starting point, we're gonna have a much greater time enjoying our cultures, implementing them, incorporating them into Islam officially, and so on and so forth. So I think that is a very important mindset shift for all us youth to have. Anybody who is, in the process of starting a family or joining the community as, a contributing adult member now, shifting over from a teenager or a younger halaqah member or whatever role you played in the masjid. Now you're actually a contributor. You're part of the community in a bigger fashion. You need to have that mindset shift, or else you will continue a lot of the problems that we're about to discuss. So with that introduction, and feel free to interrupt me at any time. By the way, Naveed, if I'm rambling or if you have any mid questions, follow up questions. This question is actually one of the harder ones, just because, subhanAllah, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant victory and ease and relief and comfort and support and food and drink and shelter and protection to our Muslim brothers and sisters in Gaza and all over the world who are struggling. But especially with the way that the drastic shift of what has happened in the last few months with that particularly, it just makes you always wonder, like, are we gonna last 50 years, right? Are things gonna last 50 more years? But putting that aside, in general, just based on the trend of Islam and the development of communities that I've seen, alhamdulillah, in the last couple of decades, I would say very clearly there's a huge influx of Muslims, um, new Muslims, reverts, as well as people coming from whatever backgrounds they're coming from. People who are coming from either non-practicing backgrounds or secular backgrounds. These people are coming in droves. So Islam was always huge in America in terms of numbers, right? 1 or 2% of its population. Not huge percentage wise, but when it comes down to numbers, it's a couple of million. New York City itself has 1.5 estimated. So I was just discussing with some friends of mine. They're saying like they feel like this Ramadan the masajid are way more packed. What they don't understand is that if we have a 1% uptick of Muslims, 1% of the Muslims in New York City increase, want to go to the masajid, we literally won't have space for them. The masajid are already full. So if there's a 1 or 2% increase, literally you're talking about tens of thousands of people. Well, no masjid can hold them. The average masjid here, you've lived here in Navid, you've seen how small they are. They can barely fit 200 people. A larger one, like the center I work at, could fit maybe 800, 900, right? And that's like one of the largest ones around in New York City. So, size wise. So then it really shows you that if a small increase shows you the results that we're seeing now, which is the messages are full, alhamdulillah, youth coming back to the deen. So I think that will increase. And I think that will continue as a trend, especially with Americans accepting Islam. I think we're at a very, very important threshold now in terms of the people who are accepting Islam are very influential. So recently we had Sean King, as much as controversial as it is, Andrew Tate, um, Lil Jon recently as well. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala keep them all steadfast and continuously guide us all. This is a shift in this could lead to a cultural shift that I'm anticipating. Definitely an influx of shahadas at the very least. I don't mean a cultural shift across the whole country, but definitely towards mainstream people accepting Islam and proselytizing their faith publicly on whatever platforms they have, becoming more and more mainstream to accept Islam genuinely, and with the tenets becoming more commonplace. So I think that's definitely going to happen. Will Muslim influence increase? That's like something I always wonder, and inconclusive. Like, what will our role be in society and in government? It's definitely always on a general upward tick in the last few decades with first generation and second generation immigrants and children of immigrants developing and joining systems and government and whatnot. But the most obvious conclusion that I would make is just the growth of the faith in terms of congregants and what I just described. Everything else, I'm kind of not really sure what take to give on in recent light.
So if I may interrupt, right? How do you envision so do you envision people today who are Muslim that their grandkids 50 years from now may not be Muslim? Granted, Muhammad, I mean, New York City is a whole different world, right, compared to Buffalo, to be honest. But in Buffalo,
I
and
know. Look at the weather. Look at the weather behind you. It's nuts.
yeah, this background behind me is the exact opposite of Buffalo. But I think in Buffalo you don't even have to wait 50 years. I think you already see it now, right? There might be parents who are actually very active in the masjid, very, visibly good Muslims, and then their kids are the polar opposite, right? I because there's a difference when you live in a community where yes, 1.5 million, right, compared to New York City in the grand scheme of things is small, but still that's a lot of people, right? You can actually live your whole life as if you're in a Muslim country where your whole life you're just dealing with Muslims for the majority of your life, right? Majority of your day. In Buffalo, it's not really like that, right? Or West New York in general, it's not really like that. And because of that, when I asked the same question to my local masjid, actually, I did like a small little khatara at like the Hajj time, and when I asked that question, you can tell from people's faces that they don't really know, they don't really have an answer to that question, right? Will my grandkids be Muslim? Um, and in these smaller communities like Buffalo, smaller compared to like New York City, right? It really is a concern. It really is an issue, right? Because kids assimilate a lot faster in these smaller pocket communities throughout the nation versus bigger cities. So I mean, with that in mind, do you foresee people who are Muslim today and that their grandkids in 50 years might not be Muslim anymore?
May Allah protect all our families. This is a reality that's already happening. And like you said, you don't have to wait for grandkids. I went to Brooklyn College, right in the middle of New York City. Huge MSA, huge Islamic Dawah efforts, Islam Awareness Week, different types of events on the regular. And when we were doing Dawah Week, we doing Dawah to people. One person did say, "Oh, my father was Muslim, or my father does Ramadan." And like you're just like you know how to navigate. You're like, "Oh, cool." So you don't know. You want to ask like directly, "Are you Muslim?" Because if they are, it might be insulting.
Yeah,
Uh, But then, like, just by asking a little bit, you find out that, oh, no, I'm not. I just never really looked into it. He never really enforced it on us or whatever it may be. Or sometimes, like, oh, no, he's very religious. He goes to the masjid, but we just kind of did our own thing. And that's, you don't want to pry in the family dynamic of what exactly is going on. But it's the second, it's right away, the children, that they're no longer Muslim and you don't know what happened. So, with the trend of Islam growing and Muslims increasing, no, we definitely see this other problem as well. In fact, some people, and I think this is a bit cynical and pessimistic, but they say that the influx is offsetting the exit, right? There's people leaving and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is replacing them. This is a real fact. The idea that this happens. وَإِن تَتَوَلَّوْا يَسْتَبْدِلْ قَوْمًا غَيْرَكُمْ ثُمَّ لَا يَكُونُوا أَمْثَالَكُمْ. He says at the end of Surah Muhammad, if you turn around, if you're not interested, he will replace you with another people who will not be like you. They will be interested. They will be sincere. They're going to give it their all. They won't be wish-washy about it. If that's the path that you choose, Allah will replace you with those who will have the opposite qualities that he values. So with that being said, we pray for protection and continuous guidance. But whether that's happening, like offsetting the leave, it's not important. The point is there is a big leave, there is a big exit. Islam is in America a revolving door. People are entering and people are exiting simultaneously. So it's a real issue that you have to make a life goal. Like the same way we make starving and getting kicked out of our homes, or not being able to make rent. These are like, I can never let this happen to me and my family. Right? This is like as a man or as a parent, you think to yourself, this is like the basics of caring for my family. I
mm,
can't ever not make rent. I can't ever there can never be nothing to eat at home, right? And it's mealtime. That's my job. So it's not something that anyone has to tell you. It's just something that drives you, right?
right.
Why is the case? Why does that drive us?
I
Why
mean,
is it something that in intrinsically, I feel like if I right now, for example, we have we have some leftovers, and as of right now, I'm not sure if they're enough for iftar. It's something on my mind. I'm not particularly hungry. I was under the weather, had like a cold, so I can like eat probably like an apple, and I don't care. But I don't have the freedom to think like that, right? This is what I'm getting at,
Mhm.
and I recognize that, and I feel that invisible pressure. And as we get closer to iftar right now, 3:24, in the next couple hours, even if no one in the family asks what we're eating, I'm gonna have to. That's my job to figure it out. Because there's nothing at home, right? There's nothing like it's not like I can say, oh, someone's gonna prep something. Or I know there's nothing here, right? We didn't get groceries or whatever. That is like an invisible pressure on me. I'm using such a simple example because it's something that we can all relate to. The need for food, the drive for food. In fact, it's a big central theme of Ramadan that we're learning through our drives for food and drink that there's other basic necessities, there's other more important necessities than your physical body. In fact, for the entire year, you're nurturing this, you're building this, you're protecting this, you're focusing on this, you're looking in the mirror before you leave at this, and you're checking. You're so attached to this. We're so confined to the here and now. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, hey, take a month, a year off. It's not what it's about. This isn't the end all be all. This body that you're upkeeping and going so hard to take care of, it's going to be dust anyway. It won't last. And the soul that's going to continue onwards, that you're neglecting throughout the year, that you're not working out, that you're not focusing on as much, that one's going to continue onward. That one's at the start of its journey. Death is only the beginning. It has a long way to go. So you need to build that. While this one is just a vessel for this first part. So give everything accordingly in terms of priority and strength and energy. So likewise, is the issue of my grandkids saying La ilaha illallah a nagging, persistent, invisible pressure that I feel and then I get busy accordingly? Or is it something that I just wonder once in a while, who knows? Nobody knows what their grandkids will look like. Oh well, go on with life. That's not the approach that we were taught. And we see that in the Quran. رَبَّنَا هَبْ لَنَا مِنْ أَزْوَاجِنَا وَذُرِّيَّاتِنَا قُرَّةَ أَعْيُنٍ. Oh Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, gift us from our spouses and from our descendants that which will please our eyes. That's what we're going to look at and say, Alhamdulillah, on the day of judgment. Like, وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَاتَّبَعَتْهُمْ ذُرِّيَّتُهُم بِإِيمَانٍ أَلْحَقْنَا بِهِمْ ذُرِّيَّتَهُم. One of my favorite verses in the whole Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, those who believed in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and did that sincerely, and their progeny followed them in that sincere faith, we will cause their progeny to catch up with them. A lot of the scholars said this ayah means that in Jannah, every single descendant, every single ancestor in Islam will be bumped up to the highest level. So the most pious person in your family, that pious grandmother or grandfather maybe who did all those umrahs or hajjs or is constantly praying and making dhikr, may Allah accept it from all our elders and then all of us. That person who's like dusting everybody, inshallah, will all get bumped up to that level. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, you're a family in dunya, you're together in dunya, you try to stay together in dunya, I won't separate you here. I won't separate you from the enjoyment and the bliss and the mercy of His presence in Jannah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala write it for all of us.
Mhm.
That has to be something on my mind. I need that. So I think that's an important thing.
So on that note, can you give me an example, or can you give us an example of from your own experience working with young people when culture turns somebody away from Islam?
There's a lot of them. Like, I tried to think of one that would be easy to get into, and one came to mind almost immediately, just I guess because of Ramadan. And it's when people force women to pretend to fast or pray when they're menstruating. Like
Oh,
that's something, even before I was practicing, I was just like, what the heck is this? This is weird. Like,
mhm.
um, and going back to like the Islam not versus culture, but Islam with culture or refining culture, your culture, whether it's Arab or Desi or any other culture, it definitely is going to have an approach to these sensitive topics. What should be discussed or shouldn't, or how, or in what language? Sure, Islam accommodates that and welcomes it, and will not butt into that. Like that's your culture. Who might say what's superior, what's better, what's not? But with that being said, meaning how it's addressed and how it's brought up. But with that being said, the idea of like forcing them to pretend to fast or to pretend to pray is just so absurd. It's not something that I've ever seen in our tradition Islamically. They treated it a lot more organically and normal. 50% of the population for at least or approximately a week, a month, will not perform prayers of us. If your male children grow up saying, why are you praying? Why are you not praying? Why are you eating? What's going on here? And they're making a ruckus about it. That's a failure on the parents' part to teach their sons properly this normal way of life, like this normal occurrence, right? It's something that happens to everybody, or happens consistently to 50% of the population, rather. And then this happen to everybody. Everybody's going to interact with this on some level. I've met a lot of, or heard of a lot of men, rather, just to be more accurate, who like they're shocked by this whole by the fiqh of it, or just how to address it in life once they get married, right? Because now they're forced into it because it's more of a direct um interaction with the opposite gender more than they ever did before. So now they're forced to navigate it, and like they do a horrible job because they in their culture it's just like, don't, if you don't mention it, it doesn't exist, as if it's something taboo or deficient. And that's exactly how the women end up feeling. They
So
feel like
have you met somebody who has left
oh
this?
yeah, oh 100%. No,
Okay, more than one person.
I've met more than one person. Yeah,
SubhanAllah.
I don't
Wow.
know if it's just Arabic culture, but they're all Arab. But
Oh no, it's big
basically,
on Desi culture too, man.
oh,
It's the not fasting shaming, right? It's big.
yeah. So it's like a woman should not be shamed for not fasting in the time that Allah said not to fast. Like what's wrong here?
Right.
Um, it's such a weird approach to a fundamental experience of 50% of the population guaranteed to happen every Ramadan. That's the problem. For some, it might happen Ramadan twice. They gotta go through this nonsense. So witnessing that, I just, I'm happy that the woman that shared it with me did not leave the faith, still fast Ramadan, still connected to their deen, but they're clearly traumatized. And it makes you wonder how many um had way more negative experiences and just said, why do I need this?
Yeah.
Why do I need this shame and this guilt in an act of worship while everyone else is enjoying and coming closer and spirituality, and I gotta have this experience? You gotta, like, once you think of that, why would anybody enjoy Ramadan?
Absolutely. And I mean, the thing is, in New York City, you have the youth center, right? You have young sheikhs like yourself, right, who can talk to these people. But in a lot of Muslim communities, that's not the case. We don't really have these resources, right? So the only person they can probably talk to is maybe someone in the community they look up to, or someone in the community that's a bit older that gets them, right? But not every masjid has that, not every community has that. So then these people live their whole lives with this kind of resentment, this bitterness, and eventually, yeah, it can lead them down the path to just leave Islam altogether very, very easily. So, I mean, you mentioned, so you can say, the next question I want to ask you is, what are some toxic traits, found in, Arab Desi culture? They get confused for Islam. So maybe one might be this hyper conservatism, right? About something that just happens naturally, right? But what are other very toxic traits that you find? I'll give you one example, right? So in the Desi culture, we have this obsession with elders are always right. So if somebody's older than you, they can say whatever they want to you, do whatever they want, and you don't ever question it. You don't ever talk back. You don't ever, the whole cost of a bit of walidain gets blown out of proportion, right? So the one thing that happens in some masajids here in Buffalo is the elders, they tend to really just abuse the youth, man. Like I'm not using the word lightly, and I'm not over exaggerating. I really mean it. Like yell at young people for no reason, do very petty things for no reason. My own wife actually was made to cry this Ramadan by some of the elders in the masjid. And it's just like, are you kidding me? Right. In fact, for me, it was a big culture shock. Coming from New York City, we didn't really have too much of that, like in the youth center, right? But then when I came here, I noticed this is a big thing here. Older people can just say whatever, do whatever, and get away with it, right? So I mean, what are some toxic traits in the Desi Arab world that many times get confused with Islam, or get conflated with some Islamic principle, like bir al-walidain, right? Bir al-walidain is there, but if the parent is literally physically abusing you, or emotionally abusing you, you have a right to speak up, right? So I mean, can you give us some more examples of toxic traits?
Yeah, sure. Bismillah. I'd love the audience to jump in and share with their own experiences, because that's usually where you like, you'll see very, very blatant examples that that mean a lot to people. Because usually I just whatever pops to my head, it may not be the most meaningful one. But the one that you mentioned is a huge one, of course. And I want to say, like you said, they blow Bill Waldane out of proportion. Just a small asterisk. I know I love asterisks. I put them everywhere, but
Mhm.
um, one thing I would say here is like let's not say blow out of like let's be careful with our language because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made Bill Waldane the biggest deal after faith in him.
Mhm.
So what's proportion? Its proportion should be ginormous. It should be a huge life goal. It should be an objective. It should be a struggle that I own. That I say, okay, this is a struggle that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said it means a lot to him. It's important. So as difficult as it may be, this is my goal in life. Right? It doesn't mean it's gonna be easy. It doesn't mean I'm gonna do a great job at it. It doesn't mean I'm gonna have no mistakes. But this is a goal that better day. It's not it's in my lens always. It's in my crosshairs. So these mindset shifts they really do affect the way you approach these things, and that's coming from experience where I had a lot of negative approaches to these things, Islam and culture, even relationship with parents, and then you realize that mindset shift doesn't mean perfection, doesn't mean all of a sudden everything you do is right and good, but it does change the way you approach it, change the way you analyze your own mistakes, it changes the way that you bounce back, and so on and so forth. So the role of elders is definitely a huge one, and I think it's ubiquitous across many cultures. Respect of elders, it's not particular to one culture or the other. That the elders they have the say, they have the experience, and a lot of time um it just goes with the age, right? Not the culture necessarily. And subhanAllah, and I asked a couple of people these questions before we started to see the takes. This was the most common that most people had a huge gripe or a huge bone to pick with the fact that um the elders want unconditional obedience and subservience. They take anything else as disrespect, any type of input or difference. And then specifically when it comes to related issues, they are very dismissive or they are very elitist, right? Very resistant for people getting involved. We have to realize, I think, that it's not an us versus them thing. We're not opponents. Sure, we're gonna clash and we have been clashing and there's this tension in interactions, but the bottom line is we are in it for the same thing. We all want to come to the masjid, we all want to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we all want to connect. Um our experience doing that and our information about that and our expectations and our intentions is what's going to make that work or not. So I feel like these things are bigger solutions than trying to figure out what are they thinking or what do they want. I don't think it's relevant or possible to get on the same page or needed. What I do think is more important is um that we learn communication issues, we learn conflict resolution, we learn de-escalation, we learn like community affairs on an official level. Because what ends up happening, me myself personally, I have a degree in health and nutrition and a Sharia degree. It's not community work, right? One of it is like health, and then the other one is Islamic law. So the community work, alhamdulillah, I've done by experience, but I'm always a little bit trepid over the idea that maybe there's a certain way of solving this conflict that I don't know. And I'm gonna do what I know best, but there could be, a slam dunk over there, or not just a slam dunk, but the only right way. So if people study those things, community management, nonprofit management, communication, de-escalation, conflict resolution, all these different things, adult and child psychology, so people understand how these different ages think. That would push the community, I think, so much further forward. I know you didn't even necessarily ask about the solution, but you're asking more about like these cultural things. But I just wanted to jump in on this one because it seems to be very, very common across uh all masajid, even NYC, where alhamdulillah, in the masajid I have been interacting with, there's generally a better dynamic between the youth and the elders, and there's more, as you've experienced, alhamdulillah, there's more cooperation, it's more seamless, and there's less of those issues. They still happen though. They still happen in our own masajid, literally in NYC, the one I work at, and it happens still in very much so in other masajid. Other than that, I'd say my worst one, like this one used to be it's still a huge issue for the community, but for me personally, I feel like that mindset shift helped me a lot personally in dealing with it, even if it's not 100% success rate. But the worst one for me is people weaponizing Islam. When
Mm.
Islam becomes a weapon for your own personal take on something. Like that really, it's not particular again to one culture. I've seen it a lot in the Arab culture, of course, because that's where I live and experience.
Mhm.
Just like the political turn of things in the last decade. But like the second that you don't agree with what I have to say, or if I'm passionate about something, that it's an identity thing now. You must be munafiq and I must be sincere, or you must be misguided and I must be correct, or there has to be something there. It can't be just you're sincerely coming to the wrong conclusion, or me, like that. God forbid me, right? But I can't even consider that. Oh, he's just trying his best but mistaken. Um, he must be this, and I've seen so many people say something like this. There must be something wrong. Yeah, he comes to pray, he comes to the mission, but look, he has this opinion on that. Whether it's some political issue in the Middle East, whether it's some political issue here, COVID, right, Russia and Ukraine, uh, and weaponizing the faith is just like it's such a injustice to it.
Mhm.
It's such an oppressive way of utilizing, this beautiful tradition that was given to us, which was shared with us, and all these tidbits about the heavens and the earth and the angels and the prophets were given to us so people can come closer, so people can have an outlet to understand things, so
Mhm.
people can it can all make sense to them that their piece in the universe, they can say, "Oh, that's my piece. I'm exactly what Nuh alayhi salam is going through here. Or I'm exactly what the Prophet said in this hadith. That's exactly me." Instead of finding themselves, they just feel even more lost and even more ostracized because the weapon that's pointing at them, telling them to get out, is a hadith or an ayah.
Mhm. Can you give us an example?
Um, you could take like something like the first thing that comes to mind is like the Arab Spring in the early 2010s.
Mhm.
So you clearly had people pro government, pro protest, whatever.
Mhm.
And I remember my brother, he was saying he was I think he was like a resident at the time or probably at the end of med school. If I'm not mistaken. No, he was a resident, he was past med school. But he was like super busy. And he wasn't like really following up with the Arab Spring or politics at all. He was like really, really doing night shifts and stuff like that, like every single night. So he had planned his vacation for like the last 10 nights. So he comes to the masjid and he hears the imam making dua, then people yelling about it afterwards and arguments, and that would happen like on a regular basis. He'd try another masjid, the same thing would happen, and
Yeah.
he was enraged. He was infuriated. And I was on the opposite side. I told him, no, this stuff is super important. Like, if they're not gonna be discussed in the masjid, where? And this is our job, and this is a religious. And he was just like, dude, all year long, I've been like spiritually unable to invest, and I've been looking forward to this vacation to just like last 10 nights, like we used to, at the calf, whatever. And now that's just gone with all this everywhere I go. So subhanAllah, how many percent is and with it being an important issue and it should be discussed, but the bottom line is we're in America, thousands of miles away. We had no influence on anything. We weren't taking political action from what I know in any like on the ground in any productive way. Media, we weren't doing anything. We were just fighting in masajid and discussing it for hours over tea and food, and then fighting with family and then relationships soured that never came back till today. So what was the cultural part is that they said no, this must be discussed, and it must be the message must be at the forefront of this, and it must be making dua every single day against the rulers or pro protest or whatever. um and anybody who disagrees, this is the problem, anyone who disagrees or anyone who's arguing against it
Mhm.
is like a pro government, anti-deen, secular, dunya loving, like all these things were thrown out, either
Mhm.
all thrown at people, either all at once or just one of them at the very least. Like you're a pro government trader, you're you can't be trusted, right? You're a problem of society that is going to proliferate the oppression. Like that's like the least label that would be thrown on you. um and people left masajid and didn't come back, right? They
Mhm.
found some other masjid that was being politically quiet or not getting involved. They said, here, I love it here,
Mhm.
this is what masajid are for.
Mhm.
Irrespective of like what side you're on, the weaponization was the problem.
Right, weaponization. So I mean, speaking of weaponization, right? I think one thing that's hard, I mean, it's good. This is a good example because it leads to my next question. I think it's very difficult to ignore the effects of colonization, right, on masajids and on, I think, perhaps our grandfather's generation and our father's generation. So what I mean by that is I think that when it came to our father's generation, right, and our grandfather's generation, the culture really actually helped them hold on to their Islam because it was their identity, right? And it helped them hold on to, um, I'm Egyptian or I'm Pakistani, and part as being Muslim and part as going to the masjid, part that, you know what I mean? The Islam and the culture were kind of interrelated, right? But with that comes the drawback of the effects of colonization. So what I mean by that is, let me give you a simple example, right? So I'm well aware in I I don't think every Muslim country, but a good number of Muslim countries, right? There's this one like lifetime exam, right? People take, and apparently that one exam determines the rest of your entire life, right? If you score high, you become a doctor, and there's like this whole hierarchy, right? And then all the way at the bottom, i.e., the failures in life, i.e., the dumbest people in society, right, are the ones that are sent to the madrasa or to memorize Quran, or the ones that are sent to study Sharia, right? And of course, there's so much we can talk about this and how unjust and how horrible this is, right? But it does have an effect on the culture, right? I'll speak from the Pakistani culture, right? Religious people are always portrayed as the idiots of society. Religious people are always portrayed in, Pakistani media, for example, right, in dramas and all this stuff, right, as the villains, the backward people, the reason why we're still a third world country, the reason, like, for God's sake, we have telescopes and they still can't see a moon and figure out when Eid is. You know what I mean? That mentality. Now, that mentality does leak into, even, I would say, people who are like our father's age, who are part of masajids, right? Who are board members sometimes of masajids, right? They have this, if I'm a doctor, I'm the pinnacle of success. You can't tell me what to do. If I'm a doctor, who are you to tell me what I'm doing is wrong? If I'm a doctor, I don't have to listen to you. You see what I'm saying? Like, the hierarchy is still
Yeah.
there. Can you comment about this? And can you tell us, have you dealt with this? And um, I mean, just any of your, basically, your thoughts about this and how detrimental this is to the future of Islam and to, the faith of many young people, who are trying to practice Islam, but then they're met with this cultural, inferiority, superiority complex kind of hierarchy that's imported from the Middle East and from, Eastern countries.
Yeah. It's a normal trope. It's the expected outcome that the colonized emulates the colonizer. The inferiority complex there is it's only one of two possibilities: resistance or subservience with that inferiority complex. And that's every colonial project that ever existed throughout history, right? Any
Mm-hmm.
type of colonization of anywhere is going to have two responses: resistance and then inferiority complex type subservience. And they obviously push for the second and try to eliminate the first, um, physically at first, because that's like where the real problem is. And once they physically get rid of resistance, now they need to get rid of mental resistance, spiritual resistance,
Mm-hmm.
to cement that inferiority complex and to keep you subservient for centuries, to keep this the norm beyond our physical bodies. That's going to continue for generations. Your country will always be like this for the foreseeable future. That's like the kind of game that they play. So that can be done by killing the resistance, right? You have resistance fighters in uh, wherever, Egypt, Palestine, uh, all the colonial countries that we had, the India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, all these places, Algeria, Tunisia, where they were colonized by forces. In the beginning, there was physical resistance, and they did their best to crush that, while simultaneously realizing that they had to instill uh, an assault on the sources of that physical resistance. So what would make people physically resist when they realize that they're free and that they deserve to be free? So give them the illusion that they're free. Here you can walk around, you can dress however you want. What's actually keeping you tied down is this Islam thing. You gotta cover your head if you're a woman. You gotta dress like this. You gotta dress like that. You gotta eat like this. That's we're gonna free you. So that freedom part is done there. And when it comes like to the religious narrative, they have another approach there, and so on and so forth. And through that, they breed the cultures that we see around us here. which are very dunya centric. So one friend of mine put it very aptly. He said their North Star is success in this world, meaning that's like always their compass. That's always the direction they're headed. So when it comes to finances, success means having the most. When it comes to prestige, success means being a doctor or something similar, which is, usually doctor is the cream of the crop. When it comes to influence, that means to sit on a board or whatever, right? These are the metrics of success.
Mhm.
They don't match with the Islamic ones, right? That's simply put. So the Islamic metric of success in your wealth is that you earn it in halal and it doesn't become the focus of your life and you give someone sadaqah. That's success. Doesn't the numbers don't matter, right? But if you do that sincerely, then as the Prophet ﷺ said, "Sadaqa dirham mi'ata alf." One silver coin has beaten 100,000. It's a possibility. How? Because of the intention, right? So that's success in finance. Success in terms of prestige, your status is to be a good Muslim, upright, someone who holds himself upright and proliferates that amongst others.
Mhm.
Completely different, very much simpler, much more conducive to like a building a society and looking at bigger goals and walking a higher path, developing your country outside of it's the mire that it's in that's been swamped in from all these other forces. But if you don't have that mindset, you'll naturally just end up making all these wrong choices that will be most likely either selfishly based, just like what immediately benefits you, or
Mhm.
based on that North Star of the worldly metrics, like I just said. So I think that's what happened to our cultures. And I remember one professor, like he came to class, and this is really bad that the professor's saying this to the students. But I guess he was frustrated about something. Like there was a bunch of people who didn't have their books, and like it was like the third week of the semester, and they didn't buy the book yet. So he was just like, I guess he was venting. And this happened a lot because in their time, 60, 70 years, 50 years ago, 40, 50 years ago rather, a lot of them like even if you were a failed kid and they tried to put you into Sharia, it wouldn't work because there's so much memorization, there's so much
Mhm.
Sharia specifically.
Yeah.
Um,
Right.
there's so much that you cannot wing in Sharia.
Mhm.
Because it needs understanding at least on some level. Um, so they I guess were very mad that now it's all multiple choice. It's been watered down, so the people who are low quality can hear. But he went on a rant once and he said, "Listen, amongst my colleagues, the professors, meaning the faculty, they call Kulliyat Sharia, the College of Sharia, Mazbalat al Jama, the garbage bin of the university. It's the last stop
Mhm.
as your GPA hits 1.0 and you're on probation. The last stop is Kulliyat Sharia." Because they'll take you at a 1.0 or like a 1.7, whatever, and they'll give you one more chance. So that culture that allowed this to happen, why wouldn't the garbage breed? Why wouldn't the garbage, filter down here? Why wouldn't they trickle down to Sharia? I
Mhm.
had a colleague who said I just transferred over into from bio. So I was like, oh cool, you're interested in like in Dean studies? He said, not at all. So why'd you transfer from bio? He said, I need a job. As a bio, as if I get a degree in bio, I'm not gonna do anything with it unless I go on to harder stuff, which I can't.
Mhm.
uh, or post grad. But if I do a Sharia degree, they'll put me as a high school Islamic studies teacher and I'll get a job. I'll have an income at least. That's a catastrophe if this guy's gonna go teach Islamic studies. He's not a particularly bad person, but he's not interested at all. He's not passionate. He's only doing it for that. Like, what's he gonna end up teaching kids about life purpose and connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Like, he could be passionate. I don't want to judge him. I don't know anything about him. But at the same time, like just from his own intention and his goals, it's very, very worldly, very, very like, low hanging fruit. So these cultures all have to change. And I think the first step is to like relearn our history. Relearn that we were never backwards. We were never struggling to we were never struggling to find our place in the world, to find our contribution in the world. That never happened.
Mhm.
At the time of the Sahaba, until the late Ottoman period, this ummah was pumping out science and math and inventions and leading the world so many times. May not have been one continuous block of 1400 years or 1300 years from the Sahaba to the Ottomans, but chunks of it, hundreds of years at a time, leading the world. And I highly encourage you to pick up the book by it was his let me look it up here very quickly. I think so, like what the world lost. I'll look it up inshallah and share, but it's what the world lost due to the decline of Islamic civilization. What is the name of the article? It's by Abu Hassan Nadwi, Sheikh Abu Hassan. I think that's what the book is called. No, it's Islam in the World, the Rise and Decline of Muslims and its Effect on Mankind. That's the book. Islam in the World, the Rise and Decline of Muslims and its Effect on Mankind. So there's a couple of books written similarly. I've read some of them, they're all like very, very similar. This one's very, very good. And they basically just go through some of the inventions the Muslim world presented, the style of education, the development of adult education, all that originated and was developed by the Muslim world. And I'm not gonna be one of those guys saying, "Oh, we used to do this, we used to do this," because we're at a stagnation here, that's for sure.
Mhm.
But and we're in like a very swamp-like situation in our faith and in our development. But with that being said, I refuse any type of inferiority complex or defeatist or pessimism coming in like, Muslims are such losers. We were always behind. What did our faith do for us? That's not that's someone who is they won. They won with that person because they successfully convinced you that you are a leech from other societies, while the fact of the matter is the entire world today only exists in the way that we know it, in its technology, in its development because of the Muslim world.
Mhm.
How to make such a bold claim with one invention, math, right? The inventions that
Yeah,
Muslims contribute to in math,
exactly right.
the zero, logarithms, algebra. How much of this very technology that we're using now depends on that.
Right. I mean, algebra was invented to understand the laws of inheritance, right? I mean, that shows you. And we invented the concept of universities, right? We invented the concept of gardens, actually, right? We invented the concept of so many things. I mean, so what you're saying, Muhammad, is that it's pretty absurd to think that Islam is just, let me just pray in my little corner. Maybe I'll fast. Just be a good person, right? But that's about it. This division between uh Islam and how would I say this? This division between reality, right? My dunya, right, and my deen, right? I think especially in Desi culture, this is very big, right? People always have this divide. There's like people would say like beta means son, right?
Yeah.
Like
I'm multicultural, I know.
yeah, you gotta take care of don't be too extreme in your deen. You need dunya too. It's like, what does that even mean? Like, what are you even saying, right? So from what you mentioned, this is completely a fallacy. This is completely false, right? Islam, like, there's no separation of deen and dunya. Like, your deen is your entire dunya to begin with, right? Um, so I mean, if that's the case, then Muhammad, I mean, you mentioned some really good examples of math, algebra, all this stuff, right? Then why are Muslims so behind? If I go right, if I book a plane ticket right now and fly to any Muslim country in the world, it's not a very nice place to be. Most Muslim countries are third world countries, right? And on top of that, like, there's so much happening around the world right now. Like, take Gaza, for example, right? Take the Burmese Muslims. Take there's so I can't even it'll take me like a few minutes to just go through the entire list, right? But still, why is it that I go to Jum'ah and my local imam or khatib or whatever scholar is still talking about tasbih, still talking about, as if they're completely cut off from reality, as if they're completely living their own world under a rock somewhere, right? And especially in some Muslim countries, we know the khutbah comes from the government, right? So there's nothing at all relevant. It's just the same old Sunday school curriculum rehashed over and over again, right? If everything you just said is true, which it is, I'm not disagreeing, but I'm just playing devil's advocate here, right? Why are Muslim countries so behind? And why is it that it seems like the religious class of society, right? The clergy, the shayukh, the students of knowledge, right? They're almost in their own world. Like, they're almost cut off from reality, right? They're not talking about how to alleviate poverty. They're not talking about social issues. They're not talking about anything that's relevant to me. right? It's just the same old Sunday school curriculum being rehashed. Now, obviously, you know, again, coming from New York City, being involved with the mass, we don't we don't we're not victims to that as much. But the reality is, and this, again, moving out of New York City kind of really opened up my horizons, right? Showed me that that is the reality for a lot of Muslim communities here in America. The masjid really is, you just go and you fall asleep during the khutbah because it's the same Sunday school curriculum and there's nothing relevant, right? And then when you go to Muslim countries, yeah, same thing, right? So if we're these pioneers of the world and the world, is indebted to us, why all this reality that we see?
I would definitely contest the idea that, that the Muslim world has nothing to offer, and I know you said you're playing devil's advocate, but I'm saying for people who think like this, I'd always say, like, take your own opinions as a pinch of salt. Your opinions and, like, your thoughts, they're ricocheting off the inside of your head constantly. And when you share them with others, they come out, and then you could see if they're feasible, if they're plausible, and you kind of do that exchange of ideas and see what's going on. But if they're just bouncing around in your head, what happens with each bounce? It just resonates louder and louder, and it becomes a more set. It becomes a fact almost. Like Muslim world, the Muslim world's entirely barbaric and backward. That's like a loaded statement. That's not necessarily true. So I've lived in a Muslim country for a few years. There's a lot of issues, but the primary, like the primary difference is mostly like in amenities and facilities, which are there's a huge difference. Systems are more organized here, sure, and more efficient. More they do more what they say they do, and they function based on what they say. Like this is the time it opens, and this is the jobs we offer and the services we offer. But there's a lot of the things that fall between the cracks here that resemble back there, just on a smaller fashion. And they definitely do a better job, have better technology, so on and so forth. But with that being said, that's probably like the major difference when people say, like, oh, the people back home are horrible and they'll swindle you and I can't believe these are Muslims, I think that the biggest reason for that is simply because we came from a non-Muslim country where the expectation is you're a non-Muslim. So if you do good for me, or you do good to me, or you're kind and you're nice, as the many non-Muslims are, you're all of a sudden like, wow, he doesn't even have Islam and he's doing that. Then when you go back home, quote unquote, and experience a horrible experience, that reaction is magnified now by that fact. I know non-Muslims who are not like that. This is a Muslim country. Don't they teach you Islam in your schools? Didn't you grow up in the masjid? And look how you're acting. All these are like loaded statements that have been ricocheting off someone's head that's been living here. And I was one of them until like I experienced different that are not necessarily true. They don't learn Islam from birth. Um, I don't know how much, how to what extent people will believe me, but to pick up the average Muslim American, I think, from our circles, the people who come to the masjid, just come. They don't have to be like regular goers to programs, but they just come and ask them basic questions of faith. You get better answers than back home.
Mhm.
You find better answers in Saudi Arabia. I knew a professor in institute in Medina, Medina Munawwara, the city of the Prophet ﷺ. And he just like he wasn't even like his job wasn't teach Islam. He was like teaching something else. And then he just out of curiosity told people, what are the six pillars of Iman? No one knew. No one knew all six. And these are people who in Saudi Arabia, Islam was part of the curriculum by force.
Mhm.
Um,
This is
but
in
then
Medina, right?
in Medina, yeah,
SubhanAllah. Wow.
people who are like 18, 19, 20.
Uh-huh.
So they're in their situation
Mhm.
as countries because they lack Islam. It's not because like, despite Islam, no, it's they lack it. They're Muslims nominally, and they may some of I'm sure there's a lot of them that pray and engage in the fast and these basic rituals. But like you were just saying, Islam is so much more beyond that. These basic rituals, that's like you and your personal acts of devotion to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in a certain system, which is ritualistic obedience. But there's non-ritualistic obedience, right? Which makes me smile on the face of my brother, which makes me pick up something out of the pathways so no one gets hurt by it. These are also obedience and worship, but they're just non-ritualistic. So the fact that we just completely confined it to ritualistic worship, in addition to the fact that we are horribly miseducated, add that to the fact that we were just discussing that we in our countries we tend to push the less accomplished, less educated, less intellectual individuals to the deen studies, produces the Muslim societies of today. So it's a multi-faceted issue, and all of these things that we touched on are part of it. So We can't have, if someone notices their kid is super bright and super potential and they put them into Deen studies, we might have the next Al-Ghazali. As
Mhm.
opposed to saying, okay, this kid's super smart, make sure he's in STEM. This kid's okay, let's see if he's going to be a businessman. And then this kid, square block in the circle hole, let's put him in Kulayat Sharia. That has to stop.
Absolutely.
In
So
addition to the fact that we all accept that Islam is a 360 package, like you said, your dunya is Islam. It's not a separate category. A
mhm,
lot of times we quote that the what they told Qarun in Surah Al-Qasas, وَلَا تَنْسَ نَصِيبَكَ مِنَ الدُّنْيا. They always use that to tell, like, and so when I started practicing, so many people told me that. I was like, I didn't say I'm gonna be a hermit. Like, I just, I just said, like, I just started dressing a little bit different, acting differently, but I didn't say anything about my future plans. But they always come up to me, like, just like you said, like, don't forget your share of the dunya. وَلَا تَنْسَ نَصِيبَكَ مِنَ الدُّنْيا. The funniest part is that verse says it like as an afterthought, like, and also don't forget, dunya needs some attention too. Like the worldly life needs a little bit as well. So don't completely neglect that in your pursuit of the hereafter. That's the context that it was said in. And they say it in they say it thinking they mean the same context, but what they actually mean is don't forget that this is a category that needs equal focus and this is what you should be doing when you're young and all these other loaded notions.
absolutely. Well, Muhammad, Jazakallah khair. We're at the hour. I know this conversation we touched on quite a few things actually. But it's a loaded topic. Like I said, it's a loaded topic. There's a lot to talk about. But just 1 hour in the middle of the day in Ramadan when we're sleep deprived and no coffee. So it's hard to cover everything. But I mean, Jazakallah khair, Muhammad, for your time. And again, just as a disclaimer, my questions for the audience is not necessarily what I believe. I like to play devil's advocate a lot during podcasts to get out, the answers that I know what the speaker, I kind of know what the speaker is going to say. So I purposely ask those type of questions. So no, I don't think, we're backwards or anything. Okay. Just putting it out there.
No, we already wrote you off, brother. You're done.
Man, I'm
I
gonna
wanted to read. I don't know how much time people have. I personally, I could do a few more minutes just to look at their comments and see what they inputted.
sure, inshallah. Yeah. So you know what? For those who have to leave, Jazakumullah khair for joining us. Inshallah, stay tuned for our next podcast. Inshallah, will actually be on the issue of Palestine, but addressing a lot of elephants in the room and addressing a lot of the racial problems within the Muslim community. Inshallah, we're going to have two very esteemed guests on our show. One of them is a sheikh who actually is from Gaza and was born and raised in Gaza. And right now currently serves as an imam in Tennessee. So inshallah, stay tuned for that. It will be after Ramadan. I'll have the flyer out to everyone. Inshallah, soon, Western Young Dawah, we will have our own website. It's ironic that I'm a software engineer by profession and I don't even have a website for my organization yet. But inshallah, we'll have that up so it'll be easier for you guys to keep up with our events. And yeah, for those of you who have a few extra minutes, we love to go through the comments, maybe interact. I will allow you now to unmute your mic as well. If you want to have a little bit more direct conversation with Chef Mohammed. And again, Jazakallah khair, Mohammed, we really appreciate your time. And I would love once Western Dawah expands, inshallah, I would love to have in-person events, fly you into Buffalo. You get to meet the community firsthand, inshallah. Sheikh Mohammed is a perfect example of why we need young American raised shayukh who can really speak to the younger generation and can really address these problems. So if your masjid is hiring for an imam, let me know, inshallah. I'll try to provide Muhammad, even though mass is probably you're gonna have to compete with them. So
No comment. Um,
okay,
Jazakallah
so
khair, man. Your words are too kind, and then definitely not the perfect example. Alhamdulillah, like I had a lot of good mentors, and we're all just trying to make sense of it. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grants us tawfiq where any of these words are beneficial or push anyone to do any semblance of good more than they would have, or any semblance of evil less than they would have, then that is the tawfiq of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His guidance. And if He uses this as any tools or as any means in that process of bringing people to Him, that's an honor beyond what we deserve, and that's the highest goal of our purpose, inshallah. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept from you for putting this together and from everybody involved in that, and then continuously grant us guidance.
So going to the comments, the first thing, brother Yasser says, can we please say post-colonial instead of third world? Third world has a very, oh yeah, of course. Again, I'm not, when I host these podcasts, I'm not being academic whatsoever. I'm being stereotypical, right? This is how the stereotypical Muslim thinks, right? And this is how the culture has unfortunately trained a lot of our Muslims to think. So yeah, I'm not being academic whatsoever, but yes, academically, the right word would be post-colonial. Third world definitely has, a negative connotation. Um, is it Dean? I hope I'm pronouncing that right. He says Muslim countries are way safer than these successful first world countries. You know, I get where you're coming from, bro, but there are studies about, for example, sexual harassment, right, in the streets of certain Muslim countries is way higher than even New York City, right? The mother of Sin City, right? It depends. I would actually kind of push back and say, as Muslims, we need to stop being on this defense all the time of us versus the West, right? Um, the Western world, there's no doubt about it, there's a lot of human progress in the Western world that sometimes in Muslim countries isn't there. But we shouldn't have this inferiority complex. Like what Sheikh Muhammad just said, the reason why we're not as successful in certain avenues is not because of who we are or because of Islam. It's because of the effects of colonization, right? I don't think we need to always be this defensive, right? That, oh no, look, the West is this way and the West is evil and the West is bad. It makes us sound like children, to be very honest, just from a pure academic perspective, right? If you look at statistics, no, certain Western countries are extremely safe, right? Certain Western countries, your daughter can go to the store at 1 a.m. and come back home and nothing will happen to her. You can't say that for certain Muslim countries. That's just the reality, right? So sometimes I think we don't have to always just be on this defensive and always try to defend ourselves from the West. West is not our enemy necessarily, right? Sometimes we just have to accept and not feel this inferiority complex, right? And like Sheikh Muhammad said, go back to history. Why is the West this way? And why is the East this way? Colonization, they stole everything from us. They enslaved us. They took all of our knowledge, our sciences, and that's how the European Enlightenment even happened to begin with, right? So Sheikh Muhammad, any comments about that?
Right, I agree. I'd say the same thing that you said. The loaded statements, they make it hard for progress. So something like the West. I use that myself sometimes. It depends on the context. It could be warranted, but in context like this, it's just like very loaded and open. Same thing with Muslim countries. How many Muslim countries are there? There's like 50, right, or 60. That's like a very, very difficult thing to now like. There's a very different conversation to have. So I like what Izzuddin just said right now. He said, I was thinking of Mecca and Medina. Yeah, there's the safety there is
Oh
it's
yeah,
Mecca and Medina.
of course.
It's,
No doubt.
with that being said, there are some neighborhoods that are shady in Mecca and Medina. Of course, you gotta go look for them and they're further out. But at the end of the day, it's definitely so much more safer there than anywhere else in the world. And like the amount of like you'd block somebody in. This would happen often. Someone would block you in and leave their car running or the keys in the ignition, meaning just move it yourself, which is like super rude. Like I'm not gonna
Wow.
move your car to get mine out and put yours back to for me to leave. You blocked me, but that's a separate topic. The point is,
Mhm.
it's completely no one's worried that you're gonna take it and drive away, even though like that kind of did happen a couple of times. Not to me, but like it's as an occurrence. But the point is, these loaded statements, they could breed argument and discussion, but they won't result in like change. Because like I can't, I'm not gonna think of Muslim countries as a monolith. The same way I won't think of the West as an enemy, like you said, like because it's not a person, it's not a concept, it's not like one unified government, right? Several governments who have a general agenda and who have been generally acting a certain way, and there's merit in addressing that and recognizing it, but there's also a detriment in the way that we've done it thus far. So it's important to do what Azadine is referencing though, which is to undo the inferiority complex, which is everything that the West has to present is like this shining armor, just as Soraya said in her message, was like the idea of assimilating into these societies is like the main goal for a lot of people. The idea that if I look like them and act like them, that is the paradigm of success. That is like the mindset that is the biggest detriment to us. While if I do anything from back home, including Islam, if I take on any of those narratives or any of those perceptions or mindsets or the way I look, even physicality, all that will be me being backwards uh and that it's not what I should do. I should shun all of that as a active goal. So that's like the bigger threat, I think.
Hmm. I agree. That kind of goes into this comment by Donia or Dania. Um, Dunia. Oh, sorry, Dunia. Again, sorry guys. No coffee while fasting. I'm like half asleep right now. Um,
I cut down my coffee a month before Ramadan, so this doesn't happen.
Mashallah, man. I don't. You are stronger than me, bro. I do not have the discipline to do that. I was doing 3 cups a day before Ramadan, and then from 3 to 0. So, um,
That's
so
not.
Dunya, you mentioned cultural attire versus Islamic attire. Again, this is we only have like a few minutes left for Sheikh Ahmed, but the amount of times I think I'm okay. Look, sisters obviously go through this way worse than guys for sure, right? For us, maybe we're wearing shorts and we got yelled at by an uncle, but for them, they sometimes they just get harassed, right? By aunties. In fact, my wife was telling me there was an incident just this Ramadan in our masjid where um this auntie who isn't even this auntie is not wearing a baya. Okay, she herself is wearing like the traditional Pakistani shalwar kameez, and she finds this young person in the audience and basically tells her, "You're old enough. You should be in a baya now." It's like, Auntie, you yourself are not in a baya. What do you like? Why are you telling it to me, right? Um, I think so. Shahami, can you comment on this, right? The Sharia obviously gives us guidelines, right? But does Islamic attire have to be, black jilbab, with gloves and black socks? Or is there some leniency here? Or are we being the liberal Muslims by even giving leniency, right? Can you give us some commentary there?
I mean, I graduated from Saudi, so I'm gonna be biased with the with the
You're
black
wearing
and the
black right now.
we're black. I'm in black all over. Like if I could stand up, I'm black on the inside as well. But with with this topic, the number one thing to do, I would say, is to start with the Islamic parameter. Because once we have the Islamic parameter, that's like the non-negotiable. So what is the Islamic parameter of hijab, for example? We have um it has to be loose, opaque, um covering the entire body, the entire aura. Anything else? Loose, opaque, covering the entire body except the face and hands, with the difference of opinion considered. Not decorative, not perfumed, um, and not sending any particular message, like a dress of like a certain sect of people or group of people. Like it's a pointed message in that dress. I think those are like pretty much the conditions. There's probably a few more that would tie in here, but those are like the general Islamic conditions. Has to be covering the entire aura, which is everything except face and hands, and feet. Those face, hands, and feet have differences of opinion, but definitely face and feet are safer to cover. The difference of opinion is not as extensive as the face and hands one, which is safer. It's safe to uncover. It's not like and then having it be opaque and then not loose, not showing anything under, and so on and so forth. Once you start with that, that's like the non-negotiable. Once your clothing as a woman applies to it, so you're good, Islamically speaking. Meaning you're not sinful. The next thing that should be considered now is what would fit with the culture, and then again with an asterisk, meaning not absolutely. So if some of these conditions clashes with the culture, what do I drop? That should be an easy one, right? Because these are Islamic principles. But if one of these can be done differently to better fit into the culture, but it just done differently, not the way that I want it or the way that someone else does it in some other culture, that's fine, right? Because these principles are what's non-negotiable. What would I add to this category? Something like color, because growing up and like especially when I started practicing, you hear a lot about black hijabs, black abayas. The fact that you could choose to go buy black so easily is relatively recent. Back in the day, as recently as or as recently as like 100, 200 years ago, you bought what was in the market. You bought what you could afford to get tailored. You bought whatever was the cheapest cloth because you'd buy like one or two articles of clothing a year, literally. That was like the norm for most societies, the average person across, centuries. So to limit something like that to black has never happened, where people told the woman only wear black or that because it's um you will find in certain fatawa throughout Islamic history where they disadvised, for example, men to wear white and certain instances because it'll be tashabbuh bin nisa. You're gonna look like the woman, they wear white. And this is in Saudi Arabia,
Mm.
like 70 years ago. That is a fatwa that limit your use of the white head thing that they wear, the shemagh, the agan, because um because you're gonna resemble a woman. White is the color of woman. These things change over time. So things like color, things like the style of hijab. So always as a woman, I would say for the sisters, start with those rubrics, those like 5 or 6 non-negotiable Islamic principles: thick, non-opaque, covering the outer, and so on and so forth. And then move on. Then check your culture, your immediate culture, whether it's Desi or Arab, or even better, your family one, and follow through with it. Dress the way that would not cause any rifts, not cause any discussions, not cause any type of like controversy in what people view you as or perceptions of you. And Islam does teach us to do that. It does teach us not to what they call libas al-shuhra, which is a clothing that in and of itself is going to cause attention because it's not normal or not the culture. Some scholars said it's forbidden. It's haram to wear libas al-shuhra, any type of dressing that would cause a ruckus. If I went into Jum'ah with an all white on white suit and a white top hat and a white cane, nothing haram about those items in and of themselves, but the fact that the entire Jum'ah will be derailed by people looking at me how fly I am, it's going to be it could be sinful. So learn those parameters Islamically and then see how to apply them perfectly in your culture in a way that would not turn any heads or cause any clash.
Oh, well, exactly.
That would include pants, right? Some of them said that would include pants. That pants could be permissible, and this is controversial if they're extremely loose, right? Like those boho pants or whatever they call them, those like hippie ones, and that the shirt on top extends to the knees, so that way there's no like overlap so there is an overlap that nobody can uh as some people would try to get a glimpse. So they said that, and some said no, pants in and of themselves are conforming to a certain shape, the shape of the leg. So no, and because the hijab can be conforming to a shape, blah blah blah. But the point is, like, it just shows you that there's room for culture in these debates, in these discussions.
Absolutely. Inshallah. So, Hamid, do you have maybe time for one more, or should we?
I could do one more, inshallah.
Okay, so inshallah, we'll
Probably
do one.
want something shorter.
Yeah, one last one. Ruqayya said, so Palestine are resisting the colonial entities. Regarding this, sometimes our elders in our community speak about this and may say things like, "You don't do this because you're a girl; it's haram." To what extent is this cultural versus Islamic? What would be an appropriate balance for both genders? Maybe I think one good, I guess, example of this would be people saying it's haram for sisters to go to protest and to be yelling and screaming, and because there's free mixing and there's this and there's that. So protest is haram. Talking about Palestine is haram. There actually is a segment of the Muslim community here in Western New York that does hold this, by the way, and they have discouraged people from going to the small protests. And bro, what's Buffalo, man? The small protests that we even have, right? They say it's haram, and they say, oh, the woman should not be there, and all this. So, yeah, what are your comments about that?
Jazakallah khair, Ruqayya, for asking. Ruqayya is at the forefront of a lot of the New York City protests, and she works with some of the organizers here. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward her and grant her tawfiq. And all the brothers and sisters who have been involved tirelessly for these last 6 months. I pop into a protest once in a while, as often as I'm able to. And subhanAllah, like there's a good set of people who are there every single week, 2 3 times, and spending like a good 6 hours a week on the streets. It was cold. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward them all immensely. All the brothers and sisters who are taking part, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala write in their scales as nusra, victory and aid for the people of Palestine. Allahumma ameen. It's a tough place to navigate just because the biggest gripe is the men are not stepping up. Like that's like it's not even an Islamic argument. It's like we could have that Islamic argument, but the bottom line is if the men don't step up, someone has to. So if Islamically it's, let's say, pretend like I'm not saying that, but let's say it's all 100% haram, women shouldn't even be anywhere near there. By virtue of the men not doing it, they would step up and fill in that role and would no longer be haram. So if it's something that must be done, and we've seen clearly how it must be done and how it needs numbers and it cannot die down and it's having an effect. But the men are not stepping up. Even if it was not permissible, even if it was discouraged, they would be filling in a role that others are not, and then they should be. So that's like we can't ignore that the size and the significance of this fact. That even if we were to Islamically conclude that they shouldn't be doing it as women, yani, not as in of itself, because yeah, we already discussed this. I'm not that those arguments that protests are in themselves haram are very weak. Like they're just Islamically speaking. Because of what happens there, free mixing and music. Sure, now that's an argument that now we have to go back and forth and see how, how prevalent are these things? How avoidable are they? Are they intrinsically part of the organization? We already know that most of the time they're not, and so on and so forth. Once these questions are answered, then this particular protest could be halal or haram for me to attend. But the concept of protest in general being haram, that's just like such a weak Islamic argument. It's just so weak Islamically. Like I've never seen uh it's strongly supported by a scholar, honestly. The fair few in recent history who are famous for saying that it's haram, they're saying it in a very limited context, and they're again post-colonial countries where there is no freedom of speech, where a kingdom often rules, and that has to be looked at accordingly. With that being said, there are some less feminine roles, like chanting on a mic. Islamically speaking, I would say Islam would say that's less feminine to do. For it to be haram, and this is just like me sharing ideas with you guys, it's not like a fatwa, so don't stamp it, don't send it. But for it to be haram, there'd have to be a clear violation of the Sharia principle. So is a woman's voice haram to be heard out loud? Not that I know of any, as a lot as that's another cultural thing, or people say that the woman's voice cannot be heard.
That's actually an
Uh,
Indian thing, by the way. Chef Wassam Sharif actually he shared this with us. That this is coming from Indian culture. The whole concept of the voice being aura.
mm.
Obviously, if someone, if she's being flirtatious, that's different. But just the voice itself being aura, right? This is actually an Indian concept. But then was kind of imported by the Muslim community. Yeah, just a little side tangent.
One of the biggest head scratching moments for me is like when you read the stories of Sahaba and the Sirah and you find women like jump in saying, "Hey, this." No one says like, "What the? Where'd this creature come from?" Right? Go back to your enclave. A woman in Umar gathers the Muslims of Medina. A huge public service announcement. The president has a gathering that he wants to address, a presidential address, and he says the presidential address is about what? It's about mahr. The Muslim Ummah has been gaining wealth and mahr has been increasing. I don't like it. I'm going to set an amount. Shouldn't be charging way too high. A woman stands up and says, "You have no right to do that." Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَإِنْ آتَيْتُمْ إِحْدَاهُنَّ قِنْطَارًا فَلَا تَأْخُذُوا مِنْهُ شَيْئًا. If you were to give one of them a chunk of gold for mahr, don't you dare take any of it back. You can't retract it, right? In certain, in that situation. So she's saying if Allah said a chunk, He didn't put a number on it. Who are you to put a number when it could be a chunk? So He said, "All right, guys, meeting dismissed. Everyone go home. Never mind. What I gathered you for is canceled because this woman's right." So subhanAllah, like she stood up in this gathering, which is like thousands of people probably, um, speaks to the president directly, challenges him respectfully, but just says, "Hey, the Quran says this," and he says, "Done." Right? It's a very very interesting scenario, and it really does make you wonder what grounds does all these other cultural perceptions stand on. But anyway, just to finish with Sister Rukhaya, I would say if there's nobody stepping up and there's a need to do this, you're in the right, inshallah. Hopefully, there's no type of detriment in what you're doing. If you can encourage and push brothers, and I know how hard this is to do those things like the chanting, like the any type of those roles that would be less womanly, less feminine, that'd be ideal. But in terms of like your organization, what you're doing, I don't see anything wrong with that. If it doesn't clash with any of your obligations or lead you to any prohibitions, be as involved as you are. You're doing great work. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward you immensely.
Jazakumullah khair, Sheikh Muhammad. Again, it's always a pleasure to have you. And
Well,
Jazakumullah khair, everyone, for sticking around. Like I said, inshallah, our entire next podcast will be on Palestine. However, like I said, I think you guys have gotten a taste of my style in podcasts. I do play devil's advocate a lot. And I try to ask the trigger type questions. So next podcast is going to be exactly that. We're going to delve into the racism within our own community and some of the cultural blocks and barriers, not necessarily the fiqh, but the psychological and the racial blocks that prevent people from joining the resistance, really, and prevent people from standing up for Palestine. Inshallah, so look out for a flyer for that. And again, look out for our new website coming soon, inshallah. And with that, Jazakumullah khair, everyone, and Jazakumullah khair, Shaykh Ahmed Badawi. Please welcome me and thanking him, and please keep him and his family in his du'as. Believe me, there's a lot of preparation that goes behind the scenes. It's not just he shows up and talks and leaves. There's a lot of preparation, a lot of family sacrifice. So please keep all students of knowledge in your du'as. And with that being said, Jazakumullah khair, and I'll see you guys in April for our next podcast. Assalamu alaikum.
جزاكم الله خير. وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليكم. الحمد لله.